Welcome to Upside, where we dig into the real stories behind the headlines affecting European venture. Joining today is Lomax from Outsized, the uber cool dude Alex Macdonald, who's an investor and the founder of Sequel, currently in New York, the coolest of dudes, with Mads and myself from SuperSeed VC. On today's show, we're digging deeper into inside Project Europe, taking a quick look at the spring statement. It might be a very quick look because she didn't bloody say much. Big tech releases in AI Corner, and there's been some more naughty Forbes under 30 style fraud in startup land.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Let's kick off. What's piqued your interest this week? Alex, you as the newbie, tell us what's going on in the coolest of New Yorks and how you are.
Yeah, look, I'm just here for a fleeting visit, speaking at a conference at the NFL with 40 top athletes. So, athletes and founders have a lot in common, similar mindsets. We're both playing extreme power law games, requires people with like real strong mental resilience, ambition, hard work ethic. So love spending time with both athletes and founders. And that's what I'm doing this week. So it's a fun week.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. Thanks so much for joining. Lomax, what's new with you?
Well, good news on the personal side is you guys have taken you a little bit on my cancer journey. This week, I went to London yesterday, met my oncologist on a day trip, and I am now off chemo, 18 months in.
Love it.
So I started with a 6-month intense chemo,
Congratulations,
12
man.
months of pills, no more pills.
Yeah.
I went
man.
expecting to pick up pills, and I came back without them, so I'm very happy. So a good week on the personal note. And then interestingly, just looking at the news, I think, noticed that we talked a lot about strongmen in politics on this podcast and sort of lamenting the world moving towards these strongmen. They're all struggling a bit now, I can see. Erdogan in Turkey has had protests. They've been protests in Hungary and in Serbia. So actually, maybe it's not 100% the era of the strongman. And so we'll see. Interesting little trend emerging there.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're right. Mads, what's happening with you?
Gives us hope.
What's caught your eye this week in the news, and how are you doing?
Listen, we had a bit of a maybe sad, maybe cool story. I mean, a silver lining is that Europe's biggest company is now a kind of tech company, I guess, if you can call SAP a tech company, and that the most valuable company in Europe. What's behind that is they've overtaken Novo, which is the developer of Ozempic and some of these other drugs. Software is a great business model, and maybe SAP's rise to the top here is the last hurrah for legacy SaaS companies, or is it maybe the beginning of a new era for them? In some ways, you could say that SAP is the heir to IBM, founded by sort of IBMers back in the 70s. And they've been building their software business up, right? IBM never wanted to get into applications. They wanted to build an application business. They've done it. It's become a huge and hugely successful enterprise technology company. But it's trading now at 40 times forward PE. It's got a higher multiple than NVIDIA. And I think, people are looking at this incredible data trove they're sitting on and sort of thinking, gosh, could this be the foundation of really the future, AI enterprise business? So that's, an exciting thought. And if SAP can continue that rise, could it be a European champion in that sense?
We also had a quick sneaky peek. I was an old 23andMe punter. And then I remember maybe 6 months ago deleting all my data when I kind of first got wind that there was going to be some trouble at Mill. Now they've gone bankrupt this week. I don't know if you wanted to dig into a bit of 23andMe.
It's a sad story. I think in many ways. I mean, just the backstory is the company was founded by Anne Wojcicki back in 2006. And Anne is the sister of Susan. And they're both super impressive women. So Susan Wojcicki, she led Google's acquisition of YouTube and then proceeded to be the CEO of the company and build it into the largest, you could say, TV station in the world and arguably the most important data source on the planet. She died of cancer last year. She was only in her 50s, so very young. And meanwhile, Anne has been struggling to get the 23andMe business model to work. And it's a strange thing. I mean, they've sit on genetic data for 50 million people, and you would have thought there's so much you can do with that, but she just never managed to make a viable business out of it. And I think the wider business point is that we often talk about kind of, impressive women founders. And these were really two, I think, of the most impressive sort of entrepreneurs and business women. And one has now sadly passed away, and the other has run aground with her business, or at least temporarily. Hopefully she can find a way back. But it does feel like a little bit of an anticlimax now. But I'm sure you guys may have some thoughts. Dan, you mentioned the DNA side of things and kind of the data there. You probably have some thoughts on what to do with that going forward.
Well, I don't actually. Lomax, this is more your bag. I was on the personal side worried about them having my data. But Lomax, go.
No, I just think the only lesson, to take away here is, and I think when we talk to a lot of healthcare startups and both investing and chatting to founders, there's often an assumption that the data is sort of commercializable. So there's like, this is what my business model is, but also we're going to collect all this data on an ongoing basis. It's a sort of assumption that sits there. It's often a slide in the deck. But you know what? Like, there's a big jump from that to actually generating a business that actually is viable and venture backable off the back of that data. It's not a slam dunk, and clearly the DNA data of 15 million customers / patients, whichever you want to use in this new consumerized healthcare world, and they couldn't make it work. Let's just remember then that there are many steps to cross to making those business models work.
Wasn't it a data breach that originally kind of started the walls crumbling?
Yeah, I like you, Dan, I was an early customer actually, and when they had that data breach, that was when I sort of deleted all of my data off the platform. And
yeah, me too.
Actually, I went from receiving those notifications saying you have new DNA relatives, right, which sometimes was exciting. In my earlier days when I was at university, perhaps was a bit scary. But I missed. I certainly missed that. But equally, I came to realize, your DNA data is probably some of the most valuable data that anyone can have on you. And after that data breach, I kind of said to myself, I don't think I'd ever let another tech company sort of hold that data on me again, right? Like if I do some DNA testing, I'd want to make sure that I have full custody of the data post doing that testing. So, yeah, definitely shone a light on how important cybersecurity and information security is. And obviously the value of that data is now, given it's been hacked and is out there in the world, is significantly reduced to any potential acquirer of the remains of 23andMe. So yeah, a few lessons I think there from that journey.
Yeah, and I think maybe one more lesson is like the trick with a lot of these D2C health companies we talked about churn before, but like having a recurring business model on the consumer customer side. Clearly with DNA, it's something you're only likely to do once, makes sense. But, actually having a viable long-term subscription model before you even got into the, data commercialization, all the pitfalls around that is probably the way to go.
Let's stay kind of startup-y, investee, developing-y. I want to talk a bit more about Project Europe because so I made a comment last week, and Lomax was kind of with me. It was part of the kind of the drill down into Project Europe. And Alex, you took exception to the comment, which was we don't need any more early stage investors in Europe. I know there's loads of nuance, there's loads to unpack. I know Mads wasn't with us, and we were kind of debating it, but you then said, no, this is something to do. This is something we need to do. And we all agree that we always need a light shining on Europe. And there is so much to do. And especially in the UK, we're so bloody bad at kind of doing the rah-rah piece and bigging things up and being positive and doing the positive PR. But Alex, you very kindly said that you come on and talk about this. But before we dig into our commentary and your kickback to Europe doesn't need any more early stage investment, what is it to you? How did you get involved? What's happening behind the scenes? Give us some of the background to your involvement.
Yeah, look, I am an LP in Project Europe. I'm one of the 175 founders who have invested and committed to helping Project Europe. Originally, Harry reached out to me he actually sent me a DM on Twitter about it, or an X, and I committed within 11 minutes. And we can go on to talk about why that is. But to be very clear, I'm not like a spokesperson for Project Europe. I'm just a very keen supporter and a part of it as an LP. So this is just my perspective as an LP. And if you want the perspective of Project Europe, you should speak to Kitty, who's the CEO, who's brilliant, by the way. But yeah, look, why did I get involved? Look, firstly, we do need to change the narrative on Europe, right? There is a huge amount of doomerism and pessimism around Europe at the moment. And it is genuinely leading to some of the most talented founders leaving Europe for the US and for other parts of the world. I personally signed 6 reference letters for O1 visas for the US for European founders in the past year. There are a lot of people who are fed up with whatever reason with the UK and with mainland Europe and are deciding to go and start their companies elsewhere or continue their companies elsewhere. And our message with Project Europe is you absolutely don't need to leave Europe to build a generational company, right? And Project Europe is targeted. It's a very specific product, right? It is a product for young founders, right? There is an age limit of 25. And it is not just capital, it is advice from the 175 LP founders. There are 10 specific mentors that are part of the project who will be paired with founders that they're invested in. And we are the continent that gave people brands like Ferrari, LVMH. We gave people companies like DeepMind, like Novo. We have solved some of the world's greatest problems. We have some of the greatest minds in the world. We've got Demis from DeepMind, Nick from Revolut. We've created amazing world-changing companies in Europe. And at the moment, the US and other countries are coming in and sucking up our best talent. Now, what are we going to do? We're just going to sit there and let that happen? Or are we actually going to do something about it, right? And so I love that kind of optimistic, actually, let's try and change something and help people understand that they can build these generational companies in Europe. Capital is one part of the equation. It's not the only part. We can come on to specifically answer your criticism last week about do we need more early stage venture funds in Europe? And then, the second part, the second reason I invested beyond that kind of optimistic message is, we're obsessed in Europe with credentialism, right? And, there are these expected paths for founders, right? And a lot of VCs are guilty of this, and people in wider society are guilty of this in terms of looking for a particular career path and people they want to invest in, right? Did that person go to a top tier university, right? Did they then go and work for a top tier investment bank or a consulting firm, right? And one of the things I loved about Project Europe is it removed the need for any of those credentials for someone to be a part of it and to be invested in, right? And the biggest talent unlock I had at my first company, Velocity Black, was when we removed the need for someone to have a university degree to apply for a job. And some of the most talented people that I had in that company never went to university. In fact, one kid joined us and was running a $10 million P&L within 18 months joining us, despite never going to university. 2 of my current engineers at SQL never went to university or dropped out, and they're both brilliant. So I think encouraging people to think about alternative paths when they're young, and I'm talking about the very most talented people here, right? I'm not talking about everyone. I'm talking about the 0.1% of top brilliant minds, helping them think about these other paths that they could take, right? And by the way, Project Europe or starting a venture-backed startup is obviously one of those paths, but there are many others, right? Including apprenticeships, lots of other things that brilliant young people can do. And that was the second reason I committed to invest, because I believe it's a very inclusive program, and it encourages those brilliant young minds who have lots of different paths they could take, who probably the very best of them do not need to go to university. They do not need to go and work in an investment bank. They do not need to waste their talent going and working at a quant hedge fund. They should be encouraged to start companies as quickly as feasible, right? And be paired with the very best mentors and founders who've been on that path before to help them kind of, make the right decisions and nurture them on that journey. So those were the reasons I invested, right? It's an optimistic message, and we can talk about some of the data behind this and perhaps respond to your criticism as the next step. But those are the reasons I got involved. And broadly, it's a very positive thing. Not surprised by the backlash, the proof that we need Project Europe is the response to Project Europe. But yeah, look, very happy to answer any questions, or particularly to kind of dig into that point you have around, do we need another early stage
Well,
fund?
I've got to say, for a non-spokesperson, you just did the most incredible spokespersoning. So I think that was fabulous. I think there are a number of challenges with it, but I'm also so torn even to dig into them because I just want to be exceptionally positive about something that is incredibly positive. So parking the fact that I absolutely love this as an initiative. Of course, there are challenges. There was a huge backlash to the lack of diversity in the wall of dudes that appeared. I don't know if you have any commentary about that or if that is an absolute red hot potato, but I mean, the amount of women that
I mean, you just said that the
pinged
CEO is
me.
a woman, though, didn't you? We're not the only person who's doing
Yeah,
this on
Kitty.
a
Let me
full-time
address
basis
that.
as a woman,
Let me
right?
address
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Let me address that, right? And to be clear again, I do not speak on behalf of Harry, Kieran, or Kitty. But firstly, the CEO of Project Europe and the most powerful person in the whole project is a woman. There are 25 female LP founders currently as part of it. You know, one criteria for being an LP in Project Europe was that you are a founder or you have been a founder, right, previously. And so naturally that does, create some bias against, because there's already more men founders than there are female founders. But, there is significant female representation there as part of the LP base, and actually probably more female representation than there are in the broader base of founders that we have in Europe. So, broadly, I'd say the backlash on that point was completely unmerited. Harry, in terms of his funds, has, probably one of the greatest commitments to diversity in terms of female representation of any fund in Europe. I think half his LPAC are females. So like, he is very dedicated to being inclusive and particularly around, bringing more women into venture and startups. So completely unmerited on that point. And, I think a lot of the people who are complaining, maybe some of them feel like they were competing with Project Europe. Maybe they wanted attention for some other reasons I don't know, but there's no merit in the criticism on that point.
I think what people saw,
people are always going to complain.
But what people saw, Alex, they saw there was some imagery around where people were going through the press shots, and it was just a wall of young men. It was, but maybe they're cherry picking. I don't know, but they were. There were some images that I don't think proved the cause.
Those numbers sound about right. If you're saying roughly 20%, 20 to 25% of the investors are women, right? I mean, that's very consistent with. I mean, as you guys know, I run Dragon Chase as a GPLP event where we really wanted to get it. We get together 80 to 100 GPs and LPs together once a year, and we really want to make that 50-50. We fight incredibly hard. We are nowhere near 50-50 gender split, but we actually get to about 30%. Yeah. But to get to 30,
that's more than market. That's much higher than market.
I know, but to get to 30, I bet I can tell you now the market is about 10%. Not maybe not
same
even.
as Angels.
You have to fight
is roughly
so
10%.
hard. You have to fight so hard to get over 20%. Incredibly hard. So I think I'm sure that's what happened with this project. Yeah.
What the other kind of the challenge that we were raising, which I think you took exception to, and understandably so, was the fact that it's the growth capital that's the challenge.
That was my comment, wasn't it?
So
here we go, Lomax. I'm glad you're off your chemo, so I can really go after you now.
Yeah, you can have him.
Exactly.
Yeah. Look. So do we need more early stage capital right now? Let me be I'll take you back to my point around this is a very specific product for a very specific founder, right? It's for a young, very likely to be first-time founder, right? And certainly probably first-time venture-backed founder, right? Now, if you look at in Europe, I think the latest stat is 8% of VCs were formerly founders or have operating experience.
Slightly more now.
Slightly more, but it's astonishingly low number and astonishingly low, particularly when you compare it to that in the US, right? If we look at the greatest generational companies of our time, Apple, Microsoft, Google, Meta, all of the founders of those companies were under the age of 25 when they started their business, right? And in fact, they were all first-time founders. I think there is an opportunity for us to have some of those generational companies from very young founders come in Europe. If we look at Revolut, the biggest ever startup from Europe, Nick Storonsky was 22 years old when he started it, right? And so, there's a lot of kind of obsession with VCs and investing in previously exited founders or founders who've had an exit before. And yes, maybe that mitigates some of the downside, but the proof in the pudding is that the very top 0.1% of the outliers are, first time founders, and they're typically very young when they start, right? Let's look at another company, Stripe. Collison brothers from Ireland left, felt like they had to leave and move to Silicon Valley to start Stripe, right? A centicorn or thereabouts, maybe. Centicorn just produced $2 billion in free cash flow in the last year, which, they felt like they couldn't do that in Europe, right? And they were right, by the way, probably when they left, right? At that point in time, there really wasn't the ecosystem here for them to succeed, and they made the right decision, and that's proved to be the right decision. But that isn't the case anymore here. We obviously do have a lot of early stage venture capital, and the message with Project Europe is those young founders need more than just capital. They need mentoring. They need help from founders who are either still on that path at a later stage or have been on that path before. And unfortunately, that isn't something that pretty much any European VCs can offer. There are a few exceptions that we know, but that is a very specific product. And that's why we need it. It's different. It's a very differentiated product, I think, from any other VC product that is currently on the market and in Europe. And, I'm going to be honest. I think some of the kind of criticism of it is coming from people who are competing, right? And feel like this is an unfair deal flow hack, which I've got to hand it to Harry.
I love
Kieran,
that.
and
thought
Kitty.
it was genius deal flow hack.
Genius. There we go. So, but look, Harry's heart and everyone's hearts in this are in the right place, right? He's not charging management fees for this fund, right? We're trying to genuinely identify and help the very best talent feel like that they can start companies in Europe and help them do that, right? And not be the next Collison brothers who have to leave and feel like they have to start something in the US. And we can absolutely do that today, right? Europe has immense advantages versus the US. Just like, let's talk about like talent. I believe between London, Cambridge, and Oxford, that is the strongest talent pool that can compete with anywhere in the world, particularly in areas like AI. And I include Silicon Valley in that. We have the very best talent in the UK, as do certain other talent clusters throughout Europe, right? We need founders to understand that actually, in many cases, particularly if they're building complex technical businesses and, in deep tech areas, Europe is the best place in the world for founders to start these businesses, right? And look, there are other challenges with Europe, and later stage capital is a challenge that needs to be addressed. But Project Europe, at least from from everything Kitty and Kieran and Harry have said, we're not trying to solve all problems, right? We're not trying to solve every problem. We're just trying to solve one specific problem. And look, we hope, I certainly hope that people start other projects to address some of the other problems that we have in the startup world in Europe. Address some of the problems around a fragmented market and fragmented legal systems and overregulation and lack of later stage capital. I hope people start projects to address those things. Or if people think that representation of certain groups isn't right in Project Europe, the best form of criticism is competition. Go and start something and do something about it, right? Don't just sit there and sling mud from the sidelines, right? But yeah, I'll stop my rant there. I'll pause. And I'm
loving your rant. I'm loving your rant. I think the kind of the before I hand over to Mads, because I want to get some positivity in here, and I know that he's gonna be the positive king. But I guess the $1 million question, Alex, is how do we stop this being an American incubator? What are the tricks there?
Yeah, look, there are certain qualifications that founders do need to commit to building in Europe, right? When they're funded initially from this project. Whether they choose at a later stage, and we hope they will build big teams, or I hope certainly they will build big teams in Europe, right? How that works out at later stages, I can tell you about my journey with SQL, right? Where I have started, I put the Topco as a US company, but I invested in my team in the UK, but my engineering team, my operations team, my content team, all in the UK, because I believe that is where the best talent is. And certainly, the best talent at a great price as well is in the UK for my business. And look, I'm coming to the US regularly, and I'm probably going to be based here for a couple of years to help us grow over here in the US, which is pretty natural for any startup that wants to, grow internationally. The founders typically have to move to other parts of the world at some point to help it grow. But yeah, look, it is fundamentally important that we attract the best founders, or we keep the best founders in Europe and have them incorporating companies in Europe. And, zooming out a bit, thinking about this from a societal and government perspective, as we start to see, I think a lot of the I guess, economic value in society is increasingly going to get concentrated into a smaller and smaller number of companies, right? In particularly technology companies, as potentially the income tax base erodes and we start to see challenges around employment. And as more of that value is accrued in the corporate tax base, it becomes a government level imperative to encourage companies to incorporate and be in their geography, right? And they want to collect tax on companies in their geography. So I think from a government and society level perspective, we should be wanting the best founders, the best young founders to incorporate their companies in the UK or in Europe. And so that we can be, not just, an arm of the US in the future, which will be the case if more and more of the value gets sucked into the US economy or into China or into other global competitors. So there's a few different aspects there, but yeah, broadly, it's a very positive thing. And so
yeah, it is.
We should be cheering it on. We should be cheering it on, but it's our national pastime to tear this stuff down.
We are cheering it on, and obviously we want to see more being done. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are now with the kind of the anti-American energy and from their isolationism, which I want to talk a bit more about later. It feels like there is much more of a European cohesion and a European push. So I think this timings wise, which is another one of my points last week, is absolutely incredible. If there was ever a timing tick box, Harry, Kieran, and Kitty absolutely nailed it. But Mads, I want to hand over to you because you've been very quiet, and I've not let you in because I've been waffling. Give us your perspective, Mads.
Look, I think it's great. My sense is that generally we need to stop worrying so much, and we just need to start loving founders, and we need to let 1,000 flowers bloom. And I think Alex, as you say so rightly, it's been one of the things in Europe where sort of we're risk averse and we're looking at all these credentialed paths, and there can't be too much risk. And what if it fails? Well, the thing is, failure is such an important part of the startup journey. It's a feature. It's not a bug. And we need to back many, many more things. And we need to try many, many more things. And we also need to try things that don't work. Because out of all the stuff that doesn't work comes new things that do work. Like Slack was in the back of a failed company, and YouTube was in the back of a failed company, and Shopify and Twitter and Instagram and some of these iconic companies came out of stuff that didn't work. And so I just think the more we can entice, as you say, the best and the brightest to, rather than go and do some dull job in consulting or corporate, to go and actually, have a go at building a company, the better. So I absolutely love it. And yes, we need to have better venture. We need better investors, and we also need better founders. But the thing is, you only really learn how to be a founder by trying. So we need to make it okay for more people to try and fail and pivot and fail and pivot and then try again until they succeed. And so I'm a huge proponent of that.
Talking of failing and pivoting, I want to talk about Rachel Reeves and her spring statement. Now, this might be an incredibly short conversation because pretty much nothing was mentioned. I think it's holding pattern time. There was very little to go on. If you were claiming benefits, obviously there are lots of reforms and freezes there. The biggest news was from the OBR downgrading growth from 2% to 1%. Now, to put that into context, the US predicted growth this year, 25, is somewhere between 1.7 and 2.6%, depending on which reports you read. And China's still gunning for 5%, which many analysts think they will meet. Now, Mads, very little said. I dare say there's nothing really to dig into here, but is there anything that we should think about? Obviously, autumn budget is going to be the big one. What do we need to see from government? Maybe we can dig into a bit more about that.
There are a couple of different angles. I think, earlier you talked about startups and the startup angle on this. I mean, just to start with maybe the slightly wider angle is that, we spoke a few weeks ago about how Peter Kyle had spoken about the kind of the 40 billion pounds of efficiency gains the government was looking to find with AI. Not mentioned at all. And this is the problem. It's a hugely missed opportunity. We need to identify those efficiency gains. We need to put them in the budget. We need to lock them in, and we need to use the gains to fund investment and tax reductions. The tax burden in the UK is now headed towards 37%, highest since the Second World War. Businesses are reeling. The wealth is leaving the country. We got to reverse that negative spiral. We got AI here. Let's use it. Let's be ambitious. So I think it was a missed opportunity, and I think that was a shame.
I heard a couple of thoughts on this, right? Just thinking about why it is important and it's a reminder of why it is, right? I think for me, the biggest problem looking at this is that Rachel Reeves has set this target by 2030 of running a zero deficit, right? So basically all the money we raise in taxes, we spend, right? So we don't actually raise any money on top at the moment for context.
Excluding investments.
Excluding investments, yeah, of course. But I think she's created a rod for her own back, right? Number one is she has very little, we now know she has very little headroom on that. She currently has 10 billion of headroom, which is the lowest headroom any chancellor has had for the last 30 years. But what it means, this
10,
reminds me
9, I think.
In the context of startups, right, in our world, yeah, okay, there are implications for startups off the back of what's going on in the economy. But I thought of a couple of analogies here as to what's going on with Rachel Reeves and the UK economy. Analogy number one, yeah, you know, in startups, when you conduct a RIF, you realize you need to cut costs, but you don't go deep enough with the first cut. So you do it once, and then you do it again 6 months later, and then you do it again 6 months later. But instead, you should have all done it in one go at the beginning. And everyone you create the morale paranoia kicks in. You kill everything. It feels very much like this with Reeves. She set this very hard target. She announced the budget last autumn. She's now come back again. It's like, oh, we need to cut a little bit more, and the same could happen again in November. It feels like the analogies. Kind of, and the second one is like, this also feels like, I guess we've seen this a lot on founder boards in the last 3 years, the advice / pushing towards break even, this obsession with pushing the companies towards break even. And that can be good, of course. I'm not poo-pooing that, but I'm also saying is you can sometimes prioritize break even at the expense of growth and actual, like the whole, mission in the first place. And, looking at, what we're doing in the UK, it also feels like that at the moment. It's like we're trying to be kind of like steady state when actually we're forgetting, like, maybe we need some fiscal stimulus here. Maybe we need to do what Germany's doing. Maybe we do need to borrow a bit more. And yes, the borrowing costs will go up, but maybe we do need to invest rather than like trying to really cut our cloth to try and like rein everything in. And as you've just seen, growth forecast has been cut. And by the way, guys, in the UK, do you know how every time the economy goes up by 1% GDP, you increase the tax take by 10 to 15 billion. So the biggest way you fill these deficits is by GDP growth, because of course as GDP grows, then the tax revenue increases, right? So if you have a 4%, suddenly you're 10, 20, 30, 40 billion better off, and you don't need to go and make the cuts they're making to the welfare, et cetera, et cetera. So those were just some observations, and I hope this doesn't continue. I'd rather just see a bit more fiscal stimulus, quite frankly, and that will then flow through to what we do.
Yeah, look, I think the most fatal blow to the UK economy is nothing new from the spring statement. It was what she announced last year in terms of the rise in national insurance contributions, and that is going to have a hugely negative impact on the UK economy. I've already seen lots of very large firms doing their sort of redundancy processes ahead of it coming into play, and you're seeing a lot of small businesses, particularly in hospitality, places like pubs, restaurants, which employ a lot of people, saying that they're going to have to, cut a lot of their staff, or a lot of them are shutting down, right? And I think that national insurance contribution rise may end up being a net negative for the Treasury in the long run. As you said, Lomax, right? We all we need to do to increase tax takes is to get the economy growing, right? We need pro-growth policies, and a lot of these kind of short-sighted tax rises, whether it's implementing potential wealth taxes, increasing taxes on certain, or removing like non-dom status for people, right? A lot of these taxes, when they actually come into play, we find out that they're actually a net negative for the Treasury, and I'm very concerned about that particularly that rise in national insurance for businesses, which, we were promised no tax rises for working people, whatever that means. And I don't think we anticipated when Rachel said that would mean that large numbers of people would be losing their jobs, right? Which is the actual case, right? So yeah, look, we're in a precarious and perilous situation, but all of these things are choices that we can make, right? And it's very easy to undo it. We just need to embrace some pro-growth policies, right? And, we need to incentivize companies to invest here. We need to incentivize companies to hire people here and to build businesses here, and founders to stay here and start businesses here. And those policies are all out there. They're easy for the government to implement if they wish. But this constant kind of war, seemingly, on entrepreneurship in particular, but also just generally on private enterprise and businesses, where we now have a minority of the population in the UK supporting the majority, right? There's a minority of the population that are actual net tax contributors in the UK and are really paying for the rest of the population. That number is going to continue to get lower and lower, right? As wealthy and, people with a lot of potential in their careers decide to leave for greener pastures. So we need to address this urgently. And my feeling is the spring statement, it sounds like Rachel may be someone who's very much under pressure at the moment and fearing for her job. And, as she should be, because she should be held to account if her policies don't, impact the UK positively. So feels like it was very much, as you said, like a bit of a nothing burger, but a lot of the damage was done last year, right? And we're about to see the results of that.
Well, maybe we need a Project UK and give her the license to be a little bit more bold.
Watch this space.
Let's see what happens in the autumn. I know this in the spring statement is actually designed just to be a statement, but I was hoping for some more pro-growth. I was with you, Alex. Come on, just say something. Just give us a little bit of the good juice. Anyway, Mads, AI Corner. What is happening in the world of AI this week?
It's been another fascinating week, Dan. We've seen OpenAI being close to raising a new $40 billion round led by SoftBank. They've released some great models in the generative imaging space over the last week, and their deep research product is awesome. It's not brand new, but it's really, really good. It seems like they continue to be resource constrained. They're rumored to have another half dozen excellent products, more or less ready to go in the labs, and to not be able to release them right now, simply just because they don't have enough compute capacity to run them. So they seem to need the money and the resource to keep fueling the growth. Now, at the same time, over the last week, DeepSeek just released an upgrade to the V3 model. And it's rumored to be the best non-reasoning model on the market. It's so good that some people are even saying it's beating Anthropic's Sonnet model, which is the model behind Claude. So it's serious stuff. And, moreover, it's written so efficiently that it can run on a Mac Studio at home. So you do need to upgrade it a little bit with some memory, about half a tera. So it's a $10,000 machine, so maybe not exactly your standard laptop, but it's open source. You can run it at home, and I can see why, if you're Sam Altman, you're feeling the heat, and you're probably going out now to try and raise a lot of money so you can keep running, because you're kind of feeling. You're feeling the DeepSeek team and some of these open source teams breathing down your neck. So I can sort of sense his stress. Now, at the same time, Google has just released a new version of Gemini, and it's an absolute beast of a model. It's integrating reasoning with exceptional performance. I've taken it for a road test. I found it to be, one of the first truly enjoyable Gemini models. I felt in the past they've been sort of verging a little bit. I've had a little too many guardrails in terms of what they could do and what they could say, and kind of the DEI police were locking them down. But I feel now it's super clever, super smart. The reasoning is exceptional. So really, really enjoyed that. And so, yeah, the AI wars are continuing. Maybe one for the room here. Have any of you played with Reeve yet? The kind of the new Midjourney killer.
No, just seen it.
Tell us.
Yeah, no, it's just come out. I guess exceptional image generation ability, and you can kind of weave letters and text, straight into images. That was one of the problems in the past. You've sort of said, look, put this writing on this image, and they sort of always got the letters wrong. Well, Reeve gets it right, and you can imagine all kinds of things you can do with that. So that's cool, and that's come out now just in the last week. Another thing that's been rearing its head again, which may be one for discussion, is AI and copyright. How does the room feel about using copyrighted works to train AI models? I know there's been yet another case in the past week.
Yeah, well, it was a case. Wasn't the case lost? Wasn't it Sony and they lost the case? Matt, do you remember?
Well, I think it was initially they tried to sort of get an injunction to say you just have to stop right away, kind of broad brush, without even hearing the full case. And I think that was dismissed. But I think there will still be a case, and I can't imagine that there won't have to be some settlement at some point. But it's obviously it's going to be crucial, and the litigation will continue.
Isn't it very simple? I mean, yeah, I can see injunctions obviously, have a higher threshold burdens that probably means that it wasn't granted for that reason. But isn't it obvious? Isn't if you have copyrighted material and someone comes along and uses that to create a commercial product and makes money off that, I'm sure, isn't that a very, very basic first principle? I'm sorry, I maybe I'm missing something.
I think that's all agreed, but I think it's the management thereof, right? Sorry, Alex, go.
Well, the argument, and a lot of people are making, or certainly the foundational model companies are making, is, we have copyright laws in the UK, and there are different ones in the US and other parts of the world. But basically, there are going to be a lot of countries which don't have copyright laws, or certainly not laws which are enforceable, and those countries are going to win in the AI war, because they're going to be able to basically digest, a lot more data and use it commercially, right? And so they're trying to kind of instill this kind of patriotic argument, right, that we should abandon or at least rule in favor of some of the AI models in these cases, because otherwise we might lose against China in the long run. And look, it's quite a compelling argument. My view is that if we're going to do that, we should be changing copyright laws more genuinely, right? Not just making an exception for foundational model companies, right? And that's something that should be considered by the government. But I can certainly feel for some of the media organizations and newspapers. I've already had half their lunch eaten in the first sort of couple of decades of the internet, and are now about to potentially see the rest of their lunch eaten, right? So I can understand why they see this as an existential threat. But yeah, look, there's a compelling argument internationally that if the UK or the US want to win in the AI war, so to speak, in the long run, and we want to have the generational companies domiciled in our countries, that we need to relax some of these laws. We need to change them to enable our AI companies to compete.
It just feels like the cat's out of the bag. It feels like, I don't know what's been absorbed and what hasn't been absorbed. Who knows what's gone into the Borg? But it just feels like by the time any kind of regulation or law is signed, somebody's got a copy of something somewhere.
Well, it kind of makes the incentive for humans to create. It really changes that, because there's firstly, if I was looking at it from a creator perspective, one is now I have competition in terms of machines on the creation front. And two is how do I even have protection on what I've created in the first place? So it yields interesting questions in that context. I mean,
but isn't it the same argument as Spotify, crushing musicians' desire to write? I don't think they're connected. But I mean, if you're a designer, you're screwed, right? If I can go to any model pretty much now, even
you have to find new ways. You're gonna have to find ways to adapt pretty damn quickly.
Yeah, if you're an illustrator, a graphic designer, we were throwing in some brand ideas into one of the engines just to come up with some logos. It feels like that's going to be extremely problematic. I want to talk about more problematic stuff. So another week of skullduggery and scandal. The Forbes 30 under 30 orange jumpsuits are being prepped, washed and dried. This week it's Builder.ai they've raised about $450 million since 2016. They've allegedly been cooking the books. Apparently the auditor was well known to the CEO. They were buddies. So this is all allegedly, by the way. CEO Sachin Duggal has now stepped down. 11x has been caught doing some naughty, nefarious things. They've had all kinds of issues this week in the press. Bumping user numbers, fabricating client testimonials, hiding churn, fudging how they display ARR. And there are rumors that Andreessen, who are their Series B investor, may sue. And Apple is slightly sideways, but Apple is being sued for empty promises over Apple Intelligence. A class action was filed this week in San Jose by Apple users effectively stating that they'd been misled. Now, to be fair, if I'd bought an iPhone 16 on the back of Apple Intelligence, I'd be pretty pissed off. So I guess the question is, where are the tech lines to be drawn? Where is stretching truths versus Theranos-style deceit? But first, before we go there, Lomax, you've got a slightly alternative view on these on these challenges?
Well, no, I mean, maybe this view is a bit flippant, but my initial thing is like, as you know, Alex made a very good case for Europe at the beginning, and I think we've talked on this pod before about the growth in Europe, and we'll have more and more, companies of big significant scale. It's like maybe the flip side of that is you end up with more cases like this. Quite frankly, you have more and more people raising, big sums of money, pushing the envelope as much as they can, and I'm not condoning this behavior at all. But I'm just saying the more we have people, pressing the rubber pretty damn hard to the ground, like this kind of thing, we might see more of this. That's just a hypothesis, because clearly in the US, they've had much more high profile cases. There seem to be, like every month there seems to be something coming out. But I think in the context of these two, they're clearly very different. They have their own, as you say, there's lots of allegations. There's different fact sets in both. Like one, I think the Builder AI one does sound a bit fishy to me. I mean, the founder of that company has had his own problems in the past with money laundering allegations and this audit. It's funny, audit, because in our world, in the seed world, like, startups don't get audited, right? For context, right? It only kind of audit kicks in Series B, Series C, that kind of happens. But there's clearly been some issues there. I think the 11x AI, I'd love to hear what, Alex, what you have to think about this one. But, I look at it and I'm just like, I think they're just maybe this one, they're sort of pushing the envelope a bit. Like maybe they went a little bit over the edge. I think TechCrunch over-egged it a bit in the article. And A16Z have already shut down the suing rumors. I think, maybe they were slow to take down some logos of churn customers. I think there is a problem in that company, and I'm very high level on this, around churn. We've talked about with AI agents, like actually they can come down as fast as they go up. And so actually, there may be a churn problem in the business.
There's a bigger problem with their prop. The prop is automating the sales process. So my sense of that kind of offering is that very quickly, it reminds me of those, do you remember those coffee cup pictures where people were putting the prospect's name on the coffee cup and then sending those images? This, to me, this kind of automating sales engine stuff just smacks of that. It's going to get tired very quickly. The tech doesn't work that well.
On the substance of the business, exactly. But I think in terms of the story, I think that one's a bit more hot air, and that'll be forgotten. That will literally be tomorrow's fish chip paper.
TechCrunch isn't Sifted is more clickbait than TechCrunch, I find personally. But I thought
both
anyway,
quite
Alex,
clickbaity, to be honest. But
fair.
Yeah, look,
Alex, what are your thoughts?
Look, I don't know, Hassan. I saw 11x at the very beginning, didn't invest. I know some of the other investors quite well. Here's what it sounds like, right? And I haven't looked at it in detail, but it does sound like TechCrunch made some allegations which turn out to be completely false, right? Or published some rumors which turn out completely false, including the rumor that Andreessen might be suing them, because all their investors have come out since and publicly supported them. So I think some of the most serious allegations were either false or certainly I haven't seen any proof in them. If you have a company which is growing as quickly as they are, and to be clear, they are in the top 0.1% of fastest growing companies in the world. We all know when you're growing that quickly, you have issues, right? You have cultural challenges. Yes. If their biggest crime is, leaving some logos up on their website too long because they had some customers churn, you could probably send me to jail for that as well at some point in my entrepreneurial career, right? Like when you're moving that quickly, are you thinking every day, I need to go and take that logo off the website? Probably not, right? And look, they should do better, and I'm sure they will. I'm sure they'll learn from it. But it sounds more like sort of the typical scaling, at least from the outside. I don't have any insider information, but from the outside, it looks like the kind of typical cultural issues that you see in very fast-growing companies. And I'm sure the team there will do a great job of addressing that. They obviously have some of the most reputable and experienced investors on the world on their cap table, right? So they have a great support network to help them fix these things. But it seems like the most serious stuff turned out to be false or simply rumors, which I haven't seen any evidence of.
Mads, got any thoughts?
Is this interesting? I don't know. Lomax, I'm sort of with you. Look, if we're serious about building more great companies, there's going to be more stuff that doesn't work. There's going to be failures. There's going to be people that are pushing the envelope a bit too much.
Pissed off investors.
It's just part of it. I'm just not I don't care. I don't care. Move on. Nothing to see here.
I guess it's not Theranos. Well, I'm not quite with you on that, but it isn't Theranos, that's for sure. I want to talk about something that's come up for me, and
nobody died, right?
Yeah. I think I'm exploring the line between.
And you've moved the bar on financial crime. Like,
Yeah, right.
No, listen.
As
of course
long as
people
nobody
should-
dies.
I don't think Elizabeth Holmes killed anyone, did she? Or...
no, she
I
she
You should commit
misdiagnosed a
financial
few people.
crime.
Maybe
and
maybe
people should-
indirectly. Yeah.
People should do the right thing. I just don't think there's so many things that it's so hard to build a company. There's so many things that it's important to talk about. And as you said, look, if the guys have been pushing it a bit too much, have been maybe over-speaking a little bit where they are, been overstating the numbers a bit. Yeah, yes, okay, fine. They shouldn't do that. It's a quick slap on the wrist and move on. It's just it seems like this just sense of sensationalism and we got this big scandal and isn't it terrible and lawsuits and I don't know. I don't know. I can't. All this. I just think it's not interesting.
I wanna. It's fair, semi-similar topic to be fair, but I've been playing with or thinking a lot about this, the brand issues, the power of brand and the power of soft power, around thinking about Trump and his isolationism, if I can say it. What's going on in the US? Elon Musk and Tesla. Obviously, there's loads of challenges around Tesla factories and Tesla outlets being burned and cars being vandalized. And thinking about it within the lens of, personal brand, company brand, even country brand. And there have been a lot of, again, this may well lean into our previous point of a slightly clickbaity and the news needing to capture eyeballs. But Q1 has been a bumper period for European stocks, just as the US market's going the opposite way. Many Canadians are choosing not to travel to the US. The numbers on average between land and air are down about 18%. Now, a 10% drop will mean billions for the US economy. It's a big deal. So Tesla, obviously, share price dropped 40%. But if you look back to 22 and then 20, Tesla's share price has been very, very volatile. There's a press story this week about a European Starlink coming online. However, when you scratch the surface of that story, it's just really, really, really hard to do. And Starlink is just so far ahead and it's so technically brilliant. But I guess my point being is that there is a whole world of challenge around brand for Americans, for Tesla, for Elon Musk. And how is this meaningful to anyone in Europe? Is this meaningful at all? Is this tomorrow's chip paper? Maybe to your point, Mads, maybe this is just clickbait. Do you think this kind of whole branding issue or the weight of brand is meaningful? Lomax, do you want to kick this one off?
Well, I think the weight of brand is meaningful in many respects as a general proposition. I've been thinking about this and with what Trump has done. What does that mean in terms of the US positioning and their brand, right? So I feel that there's like what I think of as like soft and hard consequences of what's happened, right? And the soft consequences are literally exactly what you just said. Fewer people go to the US. Like I buy Cadbury's instead of Hershey's chocolate. I don't buy a Tesla. Don't buy any bloody chocolate. But
who buys Hershey's? Jesus.
But that is true. Hershey's is actually horrible. It is horrible. You're right. But I think that's ephemeral, short term. I think it comes and goes. If I was in the US, I wouldn't worry about that. I really don't think. But I think there are hard consequences to what has happened. And in the case of Tesla, by the way, that's a sort of soft, short-term thing. And Tesla has its own specifics, in my view, which is like Tesla is primed for, when we move to automated vehicle, AVs, like Tesla is number one. So Tesla is like going to be okay. So I wouldn't really worry about that, but that's a separate point. But there are hard, long-term consequences here. And I'll give you an example. And there's a really good article in the FT today that actually symbolizes this. So Lockheed Martin, big US defense prime, makes the F-35 fighter jet now. They are having countries like Canada, European countries cancel orders for that, right? And or not make new orders, because now in critical infrastructure and defense, the EU and Canada do not want to be reliant long term on the US, whether it's for hardware equipment or software, et cetera, et cetera. And it's funny, and we talked about Anduril, for example, one of the new kind of defense primes coming out of the US, like big darling of the startup industry. Anduril's just had its target market cut in half for the rest of its existence, potentially, And so, funnily enough, for those kind of companies, they are actually, when I call it hard, I'm saying that's actually a serious consequence in terms of their, the size of their market. So I feel that's why I feel like there are sort of two consequences of this behavior. One is short term. I don't think matters will change as the winds, as the tide comes in, comes out, etc. Quarter to quarter, we won't be talking about this in 2 quarters' time. But I think on that long term thing, we will be talking about this in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years' time, because that is just like long term set. I mean, the Europeans won't even at the moment let UK defence equipment form part of the new EU procurement programme, right? So let alone, no one's going anywhere near the US again. They don't want to have this happen again. So I think in terms of the US brand and the US positioning, that's how I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys think about that. But that was
I think emotion matters. I really do think emotion is becoming more and more important in a hyper-connected world. But Alex, you live in a very brand strong world. What do you think?
Yeah, look, it's definitely a powerful differentiator. And when we talk about brand, it's not how something just looks and feels. It's like the values behind it. It's what people say about it when you're not in the room, right? And look, we've seen it maybe last year or 2 years ago with Bud Light and various political kind of responses to people doing certain things from a brand perspective, right? Whether we think that's right or wrong. I think all I will say is I'm sitting here in the US and people are still going about their day like there is business happening here, there is deals happening, people are still going to school, people are still going to work, and really the vast majority of people here don't really care about what happens in the rest of the world, right? And I'm just going to be honest with that. It's true. They care about what happens here in the US, and they're one of the few countries in the world that really doesn't need to care that much about what happens in the rest of the world, right? So look, I think there will be defense implications for the US in some industries, but broadly they're cracking on as they always do. And, I think there will be some brand damage, which will be not just temporary. I think it will last, decades potentially, particularly in Europe. But how much that will impact people here on a day-to-day, I'm pretty sure the vast majority of people won't notice it at all.
Well, I think one way to think about it is like I don't think consumers, for example, right, like us as non-US consumers consuming US brands. I think long term that's not going to change. Like you never write off, but actually the people who are most wary are governments now, right? And governments include the people I've just talked about. They are very in the government world or the nation state world. The US brand is long term damaged, I would say.
Yeah, and look, I think governments have to decide. They're going to have to decide if they want to buy the most innovative defense technology in the world or not, right? And look, hopefully this spurs on a lot more European defense companies to innovate and invest and raise money. But like that is a choice that some governments will currently be making. If they're not buying US, they're not buying the best equipment in very many parts of the defense sector, right? So that's a kind of, I think the consequences have not been fully thought through by some of the politicians making those decisions. And they should look, further into the future where the US is very much at the forefront of defense technology against some of the newest age weapons, right? And, if Europe wants to act, be have a strong defense against Russia, China, and other threats from the Middle East potentially, they need to have the very best equipment. So they should, rather than short-term spiteful political decisions, which may end up damaging themselves in the long term, they should think this stuff through carefully before making those kind of decisions.
Yeah, I mean, Starlink will shortly have 13,000 satellites in low Earth orbit, right? 13,000, yeah. And I think the European providers have 620 total.
And also they're not low Earth. There's low, there's low, there's Mo, and there's Go or something, isn't there?
And there's MEO and GEO. Yeah, exactly.
MEO, there you go.
Yeah.
And we're in the MEO and GEO.
Yeah, but they'll have too much latency as well. Exactly. That's a longer story. But it's like as Alex says, you can't just rip that out. You can't just there's no substitute.
Mads, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of strands here. I mean, I think there's always been these strands in Europe, right? There's been kind of, are you sort of more transatlantic? Are you more of a transatlanticist by nature? Are you less so? There's always been this debate, more in favor of U.S. collaboration or less so. And I've seen it in the Nordics. I've seen it, around Europe. There's always been kind of the French exceptionalism, right? Where the French sort of said, look, the Americans can't be trusted.
Charles de Gaulle.
Yeah, but not only him, right? And you've seen it the other way, where when you had the kind of the Iraq War and the French didn't want to join, and you had the whole freedom fries movement in the U.S. So you've had some tension over the decades, and what feels like for me, it's a bit of a shame coming from both a culture and a background that always was very transatlantic. I mean, Denmark has always been a very close ally of the U.S. Is that it to some sense there is this sense of were the French right all along? Can we really not trust and be close allies? Look, the Danish Defense Ministry has been out quite quickly and say, look, we don't have an alternative to the F-35. We're too small a country to manage and run two separate fighter fleets. We've standardized on this platform, and that's where we're going to stay. But obviously, the long-term consequences are clear. And I think what the sad thing is that much as I agree with the notion that Europe should carry more of our own weight, we should invest more in defense, we should grow up and kind of be a little bit more masters of our own house here. I think the Trump administration could have passed on some of those messages in a better way that would have been less antagonistic. So we didn't need the schism. I just think it's a shame. Why? Why are we creating all this bad blood? We should be friends and collaborate and trade here.
And communicating in a better way than kind of, inviting a journalist into a group chat with your defense minister. Right?
and then slagging off your allies.
I feel sorry for the other Goldberg. I feel sorry for him.
But if you look at France and the US, right, let's be very clear, neither country would exist without the other one, right? Like, we would not have the United States of America without France, right? And the French support for them, for their independence, right? And similarly, the French would not be speaking French today were it not for the Americans, right? So, I think there's a lot to be learned from how we can collaborate and help each other, right? And the vast majority of Europe and the US have very much the same values. So I hope we come closer together at some point, right?
Yeah.
So.
Even if we are European freeloaders, yeah.
well, so that's the silver lining scenario for me, right? Is that we use this as an opportunity to grow up, invest more, take some of the right decisions, and that the next U.S. administration or the one after that becomes a little less belligerent, and that we find a way back to a more, should we say, even partnership where it's not so big brother, little brother like as perhaps it has been.
I'm not unconvinced the damage is generational. I think this goes beyond Trump. I think this goes into the understanding there are 73 million people that voted for this man. So I'm a little less bullish on that whole forgiveness after this administration. But I want to very quickly, before we run out of time, Lomax, very quickly, deal of the week for you.
New deal announced today. Marvel Fusion in Germany has raised 112 million in their Series B, Series C, led by AQT, Siemens, nuclear fusion company. I mean, very interesting. Great to see. We talked earlier and lamenting European growth capital. And here we have a big, north of 100 million round going into a, still nascent early technology. So, that's good to see.
Europe's been quite big on the biopharma, life sciences, growth capital over the last 12 months, which is also great to see. Gentlemen, lovely to catch up with you. Alex, you're hanging in the States for a couple of days. What are your plans for the rest of the week?
You're trying to dox me. I'm gonna be back in Europe.
What's
I'm gonna
your
be
tail
back
number?
in Europe next week. No, I'm flying commercial that. I'll be back in. I'll be back in Europe next week. But yeah, I'm spending a lot of time between US and Europe at the moment, and enjoying both perspectives, and hoping we can come together as
there you go. You're like a diplomat. You're like
there we go.
A connective force in the investing startup world. Mads, you're traveling this week, aren't you, Mads? You're off and about.
Yeah, I'm off to Japan.
Whoop whoop.
Absolutely looking forward to seeing spring in Tokyo.
Nice.
Okay.
The blossoms are out. Lomax, what's happening with you?
Kitting out the new office and starting to onboard LPs for the new fund.
There we go.
So, yeah.
Let's go.
Boom.
All steam ahead. Travel safe,
thanks,
traveling
guys.
world breeze, and we'll catch you next week.
See you later.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.